The first thing Lois Aching Park did every morning was stretch like she owned the ceiling, which technically, she did. Well, half of it. The Park family estate in Gangnam sat on 3 floors of marble, grudges, and central air conditioning that somehow never reached the East Wing where Lois and her husband Jae-won slept. Lois had long concluded this was not a coincidence. She'd had a contractor come in. The vents were manually redirected. She'd had them fixed twice, and twice they were redirected again. She didn't say anything. She just bought a Dyson fan, set it to the highest speed, slept like a baby, and billed it to the household account under essential bedroom equipment. That was the thing about Lois. She never came to a fight with noise. She came with receipts. She was 29, the color of deep mahogany in afternoon light, with a laugh so full it made rooms feel smaller and a brain so sharp it made people feel stupid without her even trying. She had built her first skincare business at 22, sold it at 25 for a number that made her accountant cry, and started a second one that was currently sitting at a valuation that would have made the Park family swallow their entire pride, if they knew, which they didn't, because Lois had learned early. Never show a snake the size of your garden. She'd met Jae-won Park at a charity gala in Nairobi. He'd walked in wearing a black turtleneck and a jawline that should have been reported to the authorities, and she'd told her best friend Zola, "Don't let me do something stupid." Then she'd done something stupid, or so she thought at the time. Now, 3 years married and still so in love it embarrassed her sometimes. She understood that some stupid decisions were actually God's best work. Jae-won was the kind of man who remembered how she took her coffee without being asked and sent voice notes at 2 a.m. just to say, "I was thinking about you," and I smiled. He was also the heir to a logistics empire, the most frustrating thing about which was not the responsibility, it was the mother. Hyunja Park, 61 years old, surgically enhanced cheekbones, Instagram page with 340,000 followers that she checked more than her blood pressure. The woman had a ring light in her dressing room, a personal photographer named Taemin who she referred to as her visual director, and the audacity, the deeply seasoned, well-marinated audacity, of a woman who believed that being the matriarch of a rich family meant she was automatically the most important woman in every room. Then Lois walked into her house and became the most photographed woman in every room, without even trying, simply by existing with melanin and good posture. Hyunja had not recovered. The war began the day Lois moved in. Not loudly, Hyunja was far too calculating for open conflict. She smiled at Lois with all her teeth and touched her arm gently and said in Korean to her sister-in-law Soo-yeon, standing 2 feet away, "She's prettier than her photos, but look at how she holds her chopsticks, like she's harvesting rice." Lois had slowly, carefully, set down her chopsticks, picked up her fork, looked Hyunja dead in the eye and said in flawless, soul-accented Korean, "The food is wonderful, Iamianum. You must give me the chef's number." The table had gone silent. Hyunja's smile had not moved, but her left eye had done something complicated. Lois had returned to her food peacefully. Jae-won, next to her, had taken a very long sip of water to hide the fact that he was about to lose it. That night in bed, he had whispered, "You never told me you speak Korean. You never asked," she'd said simply, turning off her lamp. "How long have you spoken it?" "Since I was 18. I dated a Korean guy in university for 2 years. Took classes. Fell in love with the grammar." Jae-won had stared at the ceiling for a full 10 seconds. "My mother has been speaking freely in front of you since we started dating." "I know. For 2 years. I know." "Lois." Jae-won. Pause. "What has she said?" "Enough," Lois had replied pleasantly. "Go to sleep." He had not slept for 3 hours. She had been out in 4 minutes. The thing about Hyunja's plots was that they came in waves, organized, deniable, and always disguised under the thin silk of concern. She had once suggested to Jae-won that Lois might be more comfortable in a home of her own, because African women, she'd heard, preferred more spacious, simpler arrangements. Lois had been in the kitchen making herself a smoothie and had heard every word of this through the open archway. She had blended her mango more loudly, just a little. She did not fight back immediately, ever. She let things cook. The household had what Lois privately called the cabinet, Hyunja, her 2 sisters-in-law Soo-yeon and Mireille, and the family's head housekeeper Mrs. Beck, who had been loyal to Hyunja since before Jae-won was born. They communicated in a combination of rapid Korean, pointed silences, and a group Kakao Talk chat that Lois, through information she would never reveal the source of, had been added to by accident in the first week of moving in, then removed when they realized, but not before she'd saved the most incriminating screenshots to a folder titled Recipes Steaming Bowl on her phone. The screenshots included such classics as, "She's going to try to take over the household accounts, we need to move the credit card before she asks," and "Don't invite her to the spa day, say it's fully booked, she'll never know," and Mireille's personal contribution. "I saw the brand she wears, it's actually expensive but the style is too bold, she dresses like she wants attention." To which Lois, reading alone in bed at the time, had simply nodded and thought, correct, she never told J1 about the chat. Some weapons were better kept loaded than fired. What she did tell J1 one Sunday morning, when they were still in bed and the light was coming in golden through their curtains and his arm was around her waist and she felt like the world was very small and very good, was this: "Your family is not going to break us. I need you to know that I know that." He had pulled her closer. "I know you know that. I also need you to know," she continued, in that same easy voice, tracing a line on his chest, "that your mother told Suyun last Tuesday that she hopes I get pregnant soon, so I'll be too tired to attend events with you." He had gone very still. She said this in Korean. "In the living room. I was in the hallway. Lois, I'm not hurt," she said, and she wasn't. She was an architect of her own peace. "I'm just informing you. For the record." Jae-won had sat up, jaw tight, ready to go downstairs and say something. She had pressed a hand on his chest and pushed him gently back. "Don't," she said. "If you confront her she'll cry and play victim and we'll spend 3 days managing her feelings. Let it sit. I have plans." "You always have plans," he said with a kind of exhausted wonder. "That's why you married me," she said, kissing his jaw and getting up to shower, absolutely unbothered, her silk bonnet still on her head like a crown. He watched her walk away and thought, not for the first time, that he had somehow, against all reasonable odds, married the most dangerous woman he had ever met. Dangerous in the best possible sense. The way a thunderstorm is dangerous. The way fire is dangerous. Completely untouchable. Completely magnetic. Completely his. Downstairs, Hyunja was already filming her morning content for Instagram. Robe freshly pressed, ring light angled perfectly, holding a cup of tea she was not drinking and speaking to her followers about the grace of being a Park woman. She had, as of that morning, 340,224 followers. Lois's business Instagram, which Hyunja did not know existed, had 1.2 million. Lois never mentioned this. She just posted her life, beautiful, full, effortlessly styled, and let the algorithm do what it wanted. God bless the algorithm. There was a rule in the Park estate that Lois had identified in her first month. Every action Hyunja took against her was precisely calculated to look, to any outside observer, like love. She would bring Lois tea cold when Lois had specifically asked for hot, with a smile so genuine it deserved an award. She would forget to pass Lois's messages. She would schedule family lunches on days she knew Lois had meetings, then sigh deeply and say, "It's just so hard when everyone isn't free at the same time. Family should come first." She would buy Lois gifts, wrong size, wrong shade, wrong style, and present them in front of the whole family so that any visible lack of enthusiasm would make Lois look ungrateful. Lois received every wrong size dress with a warm smile, a thank you in Korean that was so fluent and gracious that Hyunja's own sisters complimented her pronunciation, and then donated the dresses to a charity auction under the Park family name for positive press. When a lifestyle journalist covered the auction and wrote, "The Park family, led by daughter-in-law Lois Park, raises 40 million Korean wons for youth education," Hyunja had stared at that article for 4 full minutes. Led by daughter-in-law Lois Park. She had called Suyun immediately. Did she do that on purpose? Suyun, who secretly found the whole thing hilarious, had said, "Uni, I think she just donated some dresses." Hyunja had not been consoled. The spa incident happened on a Wednesday. The cabinet had organized a private spa day at the most exclusive wellness center in Seoul. Fully booked, as they'd told Lois, who had smiled and said, "Oh, no worries. I already had plans," which was true. She'd booked herself a full day at a different spa. Quieter, more expensive, one that had a waiting list of 6 months but had somehow been able to fit her in because the owner was an old client of her skincare brand and owed her a favor. Lois had had the most divine 4 hours of her life, had come home glowing like she'd been dipped in gold, and had walked in just as Hyunja was doing an Instagram story from the first spa, filter on, ring light portable edition, casually panning to show the luxury interiors. Just a girl's day, Hyunja was saying sweetly to her phone. We do this together as a family. So important to take care of yourself. Lois had paused at the doorway. Then she had opened her own Instagram, her personal one, just 800 followers, mostly friends and Zola, and posted a single photo. Herself, wrapped in white towels, cucumber on her eyes, a glass of champagne in hand, looking unbothered in the way that only deeply well-rested people can manage. Caption: Rest is resistance, Whiteheart. Her personal post was not the point. The point was that later that evening, Hyunja's visual director Taemin had been scrolling through the spa's tagged photos for content to repost, and had found Lois's photo in the mix. The other spa had reposted her on their page, tagging her business account, gushing about her visit. The business account had 1.2 million followers. The engagement on that single post was 3 times what Hyunja's spa story had pulled. Taemin had not said anything. He was paid not to say things. But later that night, in the kitchen getting water, he had passed Lois and very quietly given her a thumbs up. She had given him one back. Professional solidarity was real. Jae-won, meanwhile, had started to find the whole situation somewhere between infuriating and the funniest thing that had ever happened to him. He genuinely could not keep up with his wife's mind. He would think she'd let something go, and then 2 weeks later there would be a consequence so quiet, so precise, so polite that his mother would be standing in the rubble wondering how she got there. At dinner one Thursday, Hyunja had announced, in Korean, confident, that she had been invited to represent the Park family at the CO Foundation Gala, a prestigious annual event. She had looked at Jae-won as she said it, deliberately not acknowledging Lois. Jae-won had looked at his wife. Lois had been eating her soup. That's funny, Jae-won said slowly, in Korean. The CO Foundation's events director contacted me last week to confirm 2 seats. For me and my wife. Silence. I assumed, he continued pleasantly, that you would be attending with your book club that weekend. You mentioned it twice. Hyunja had smiled. I can do both. The book club is in Busan, Jae-won said. The gala is in Seoul. Same evening. More silence. Lois had looked up from her soup. The soup is really good tonight, Mrs. Beck. Mrs. Beck, from the kitchen doorway, said, Thank you, madam. The word madam hung in the air in a very specific way. The romance between Lois and Jae-won was its own private universe, entirely removed from the noise of the house. Behind their bedroom door, they were ridiculous. They had a playlist they only listened to together, slow R&B and old-school Korean ballads tangled up together like their different worlds made into music. He had learned 3 Luo phrases to whisper to her. His pronunciation was atrocious. She had told him this honestly. He did it anyway. She had learned his family's ancestral Jeju dialect just to surprise him once. And he had looked at her like she had personally rearranged the sky. He cooked for her on weekends. Real cooking, not performative cooking. He'd tie a cloth around his waist and produce soft tofu soup and brag about it with an energy entirely disproportionate to his skill level. And she would eat it with great ceremony and tell him it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. And he would believe her because she said it with her whole chest. She baked him chin-chin on his birthday and he ate it all in one sitting and then called his friend Dong-hyun to report. She made me African chin-chin and I think I'm going to cry. They fought 2 real arguments. About real things, about the house and his family and decisions made and not made. But they fought fair. No cruelty, no below the belt, no sleeping in separate rooms. They would argue, go quiet, regroup, and then one of them would slide a peace offering across the bed, usually snacks, and the other would accept it without ceremony, and they'd talk it through until it was done. Once, after a particularly heated argument about whether Jae-won had been too passive with his mother at a family meeting, Lois had said, I need you to decide whose team you're on, not because it should be a war, but because I need to know you know whose wife you are. He had been quiet for a long time. Then he had said, I know whose husband I am. Then act like it. He had, quietly but clearly. And Hyunja, who was very good at reading shifts in power, had felt it like a change in the weather. The CO Foundation annual gala was not just a party. It was a declaration. The guest list read like a constellation of names: politicians, artists, CEOs, heirs, philanthropists, the kind of people who made news by breathing. The dress code was elevated black tie, which meant everyone spent 3 months preparing and then pretended they'd just thrown something on. Lois had prepared precisely one thing: shoes. They had arrived from Italy 6 weeks prior, handcrafted by a Florentine cobbler whose waitlist was 18 months long, but who had made an exception for a client who'd worn his work on the cover of a magazine and tagged him. A tag that had brought his atelier 30 new high-profile inquiries. The shoes were heeled, deep burgundy, with hand-stitched gold detail along the ankle strap, and they cost more than most people's monthly salaries. Lois had kept them in their box in her dressing room, wrapped in the original tissue, visited them occasionally the way one visits a beautiful thing. 3 days before the gala, they were gone. She discovered this the morning of the final fitting, when she opened the box and found tissue paper, one strip of gold ribbon, and absolutely nothing else. She stood there for a moment, looked at the box, looked at her dressing room, which she kept locked but which had a master key held by Mrs. Beck. Thought about who had been in her room recently. There had been a maintenance check 2 days ago, which Hyunja had personally supervised. She closed the box, sat down on her dressing stool, opened her phone, called Zola. The shoes are gone. Zola, who had been following this saga in real time for 3 years, went through the following emotional phases in 4 seconds. Shock, rage, satisfaction that she had been right all along, and tactical preparation. The Italian ones? The Italian ones. She hid them. Almost certainly. Lois, we are going to do nothing dramatic, Lois said serenely. I need you to call Emeka. Zola paused. Your shoe guy. My shoe guy. Emeka Osei was a Lagos-born designer now based in Seoul. A genius with materials and a personal friend who owed Lois a favor the size of a building. He had been trying to send her a pair of his new collection pieces for months. She had been politely holding off. She stopped holding off. She called him, explained the situation in 40 seconds. He laughed for a full minute. Then he said, "Come to the studio at 4 p.m. The gala is at 8. I know. Come at 4. The day of the gala, the Park household was its own storm system. Hyunja had been preparing since noon. Her hair appointment had been at 8 a.m. She'd woken before the house. Her gown was deep navy, heavily beaded, magnificent in the way that things are when a great deal of money is spent on looking effortless. Her visual director Taemin had come to the house to document getting ready content, which would run across her platforms in real time, and she had given 3 mini interviews to lifestyle blogs from her dressing room, speaking in the comfortable language of a woman who believed the spotlight was her native territory. She had checked on Lois at noon, slipping past her dressing room with a gentle knock and saying through the door, "Are you getting ready? The cars leave at 7:30. In the warm voice of a concerned mother, knowing or believing that Lois would be scrambling without her shoes, that she might make an excuse, that she might pull out, that tonight Hyunja would walk into that gala as the singular Park woman and reclaim the narrative she felt had been slowly, quietly stolen from her. "I'll be ready," Lois had said from behind the door, her voice pleasant, even. Hyunja had walked away satisfied. At 4 p.m., Lois arrived at Emeka's studio with Zola and left at 6:30 p.m. with a bag that she held like it contained a heartbeat. Emeka had produced, in 4 hours, a pair of shoes that made Zola put her hand over her mouth and not speak for 10 seconds. They were black, deep, perfect black, with thin ankle straps entirely covered in hand-painted gold detail. The motif pulled from West African textile patterns, sitting on a heel so elegant it seemed structurally impossible. They fit like they had been dreamed for her feet. "Emeka," Lois had said quietly. "I know," he said. "You have to let me pay you. You already paid me when you told the Italian Vogue journalist I was the most important designer working in Seoul right now. She put me in the feature. My bookings tripled." She had hugged him. He had patted her back awkwardly because he was a man who received affection like it was unfamiliar weather. "Make them suffer," he said. "I prefer to just shine," she replied. "Same thing," he said. At 7:15 p.m., Lois descended the main staircase of the Park estate. She was wearing a custom gown, emerald green, off-shoulder. A train that moved behind her like a thought, that she had commissioned 4 months ago from a designer who understood exactly what she was doing. Her hair was pulled up in a way that took time but looked inevitable. Her jewelry was minimal, intentional. Gold, Kenyan-crafted, geometric. And on her feet were the most extraordinary shoes anyone in that foyer had ever seen. Jae-won was at the bottom of the stairs in his tuxedo, and he literally stopped speaking mid-sentence to the family driver and just looked at her. For a moment he forgot that people could see him. Then he remembered and composed himself, because he was a composed person, except that he reached for her hand before she was even fully down the stairs and held it like something precious. "You look," he started. "I know," she said softly, just for him, with a smile that was only his. Hyunja was in the foyer. She was dressed magnificently. She was stunning. She had done everything right by every conventional measure. And she looked at Lois on those stairs, and she felt something collapse somewhere deep in her chest, because there was a kind of beauty and confidence that no amount of preparation could manufacture, and Lois wore it the way she wore everything, like it was simply who she was. Soohyun leaned to Mireille and whispered, in Korean, "Her shoes." Mireille whispered back, "I know." Hyunja did not speak. Lois looked at her pleasantly. "You look wonderful tonight, Iamianum." She meant it. She always meant her compliments. That was the difference. Hyunja found her voice. "Where did you get those shoes?" "I thought." She stopped. "Amika Osei," Lois said easily. "He's a designer I've been meaning to wear for a while. He rushed these for me this afternoon. Lovely man. A beat. This afternoon? He's extraordinary, isn't he? The ankle detail is based on Kent geometry. I could introduce you sometime. He's doing incredible things." Hyunja looked at the shoes. Lois. The shoes. Jae-won, who knew, who had always known, who Lois had filled in quietly that morning over coffee, just enough, without drama, who had spent the day being very calm and very watchful. He put his hand at the small of Lois's back. Natural, easy. A gesture that said everything it needed to say without a single word, and looked at his mother. "We should head out," he said pleasantly. "Traffic on the bridge." They entered the CO Foundation Gala at 8:07 p.m. The photographs taken of Lois that evening by 3 separate press photographers would circulate for days. One would be used as the header image on 2 different society blogs. Emeka Osei's studio would receive 47 inquiries in 24 hours. The Park family name would be mentioned positively in every single recap article, attributed, again, to Lois's presence, her work with the CO Foundation's youth wing, a speech she gave mid-event that she had not told Jae-won she was going to give, and which made him sit up straight and feel proud in a way he didn't have a word for yet. Hyunja attended. She smiled for photos. She looked beautiful. She was, by any fair measure, an impressive woman at a prestigious event. But she was not the woman everyone was talking about. In the car home, Lois rested her head on Jae-won's shoulder. His hand was on her knee. Outside, Seoul moved past in light and motion. "The shoes were in the storage room behind the linen closet," Jae-won said quietly. "I know," Lois said. "I found them this morning." "You?" He turned to look at her. "You found them and still called Emeka?" "The Emeka shoes are better." A long, magnificent pause. "Lois." "Jae-won. You are." "I know." He laughed. Deep, helpless, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere under the ribs. She laughed too, quietly, and tucked herself further into his side. In the front seat, the driver kept his eyes on the road and thought about the story he was going to tell his wife. 3 rows back in the family convoy, in the second car, Hyunja sat with her phone in her lap, refreshing her posts. Her gala photos had done well. Good numbers. The comments were kind. She navigated, almost without meaning, to Lois's business page. The post from the gala. A single photo, Lois mid-laugh, those shoes, the lights of the venue behind her, already had 80,000 likes. The caption read simply, "Showed up. Black heart." Hyunja put her phone face down in her lap, stared out the window, thought several things she would never say out loud. And somewhere in the Park estate, in a storage room behind the linen closet, a beautiful pair of burgundy Italian shoes sat in the dark, unbothered, waiting to be worn. Lois had plans for those too. They said the Park family was untouchable. They had never met Lois. The unraveling of Hyunja Park did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened the way all great collapses happen. Slowly, then all at once, each thread pulled loose by a woman who never raised her voice and never lost her sleep. It started with the Kakao Talk screenshots. Lois had held them for 14 months. 14 months of dinners smiled through, gifts received graciously, plots absorbed and redirected, comments in Korean that were never supposed to reach her ears landing softly and being filed away with the patience of someone who understood that timing was everything. When she finally moved, it wasn't with anger. It was with the quiet, devastating precision of a woman who had decided that enough was, in fact, enough. She didn't leak the screenshots. She didn't weaponize them publicly. She simply, one evening, printed them, placed them in a cream envelope, set the envelope on the dining table before Sunday family dinner, sat down, poured herself water, and waited. Hyunja had opened the envelope with the confidence of a woman who had never been caught. The confidence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Soo-yeon, reading over her shoulder, had gone the color of fresh tofu. Mireille had put down her chopsticks and not picked them up again for the rest of the meal. Mrs. Beck, who was not at the table but could see through the kitchen pass-through, had found something very important to do near the back of the refrigerator. Jae-won sat beside his wife and said nothing. He had seen the envelope's contents the night before. He had sat with them for a long time, in the complicated grief of a person watching their illusions about their family crack cleanly in half. Then he had held Lois's hand and asked her what she needed from him. "To sit beside me," she'd said. "That's all." So he sat. The dinner was the quietest meal the Park estate had ever hosted. At the end of it, Lois had looked at Hyunja, not with rage, not with triumph, just with the level gaze of a woman who had made a decision, and said in Korean so elegant it would have made her old professor proud, "I have never wanted to be your enemy. I married your son, not your approval. But I will not continue to sit in a home that works against me while smiling at my face. I deserve better than that. And honestly, so do you. This is not who you want to be." Silence. "So here is what happens now. You decide. We can be a real family with real respect, or we can continue this. But if we continue, I stop being quiet. And I have been very, very quiet." She folded her napkin, stood up, looked around the table. "The soup was excellent, Mrs. Beck. Thank you for dinner." Then she walked upstairs, drew herself a bath, and listened to Sod at full volume. Hyunja came to her 3 days later. Lois had been in the garden reading when she heard the footsteps on the stone path and looked up. She had never, in 3 years, seen Hyunja Park look uncertain. The woman moved through the world armored in silk and self-assurance. But standing at the edge of the garden in a simple blouse, no ring light, no audience, no photographer, she looked, for the first time, like someone's mother. Just that. Nothing more, nothing less. She sat across from Lois without being invited, which Lois respected. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in Korean, "I was afraid of you." Lois set down her book. "From the moment Jae-won brought you home. Not because of anything you did. Because of everything you were. I looked at you and I knew that the room would never belong to me again when you were in it. And I didn't know how to survive that." A long pause. A bird somewhere in the garden. "I have spent 40 years being the most important woman in this family. It was the only thing I knew how to be." Lois looked at this woman, this difficult, calculating, deeply insecure woman, who had made her life harder than it needed to be, and felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet. But understanding. The first clean breath of it. "You are still important," Lois said carefully. "You are his mother. That doesn't go away. I never wanted it to go away." Hyunja's jaw moved. She was not a woman who cried easily. She did not cry now. But something in her face settled. The way things settle after a long tension releases. "I hid your shoes," she said. "I know. The Emika Osei ones were better." And there it was. So unexpected, so unguarded, that Lois laughed. A real one surprised out of her. And Hyunja, after a moment, made a sound that was almost a laugh too. Almost. It was not a perfect reconciliation. Those only happen in movies. This was something messier and more real. 2 women in a garden, choosing with difficulty to try. They would have setbacks. Hyunja would still sometimes reach for old habits like a reformed smoker reaching for a cigarette. and Lois would still sometimes feel the old guard rise in her. But the war, the real war, the underground plotting and the deliberate cruelties, that was done. Soo-yeon apologized at breakfast 2 weeks later. It was short, slightly awkward, and completely genuine. She brought Lois a face mask from a brand Lois actually liked. She'd paid attention, clearly, had been paying attention for a while, and set it beside her coffee cup without a word and then sat down and started reading the news, and Lois understood that this was the apology and accepted it in the same silent language. Mireille took longer. She was prouder, and pride is a slower medicine. But one afternoon she had asked Lois, almost aggressively, to recommend a skincare routine. She'd been struggling with her skin, and Lois had spent 40 minutes with her going through her whole regimen without once making her feel small for asking. And something in Mireille had cracked open quietly, and she'd said, "You're actually really good at this," with the tone of someone furious at being impressed, and Lois had said, "I know." And that was that. Mrs. Beck brought her the original Italian shoes, cleaned and wrapped in fresh tissue, with a handwritten note that said simply, "I should have said something. I'm sorry." Lois put the note in her keepsake box. The shoes went immediately on her feet. She wore them to the next family dinner and said nothing about it, and nobody asked, and the matter was permanently, elegantly closed. Taemin, who had survived the whole saga through pure diplomatic neutrality and excellent camera work, was eventually hired part-time by Lois's company to handle visual content. He cried a little when she offered him the contract, denied it completely, and then did a spectacular job for 6 months straight. Zola flew in from Nairobi for what she called the celebration of the century, and spent 10 days in Seoul eating everything and demanding a full reenactment of every major scene. She and Jaewon's best friend Donghyun got into a heated debate about the best music of the 90s that lasted 4 days across 3 restaurants and 2 rooftops. And Lois watched them and said nothing but thought several things. Hyunja posted a photo of herself and Lois at a family brunch. She captioned it, "My daughter." It got more engagement than anything she'd posted in a year. She didn't say anything about that either, but Taemin noticed she checked the numbers 4 times in 1 hour and was in an excellent mood for the rest of the week. Lois reposted it, captioned it, "White Heart." The internet found this energy very pleasing. Jaewon started looking at houses. Not because there was anything wrong with the estate. The estate was peaceful now, or as peaceful as any large family home containing multiple strong personalities could be. But because he had a quiet dream that he'd been carrying for months. A dream of a door that was only theirs, a kitchen table, where only they ate breakfast, a garden where they could fight and make up without an audience. He found a place 20 minutes from the estate. Modern, with a kitchen that got morning light. A garden that needed work. A second room that sat empty and possibility-shaped. He showed her the listing on a Saturday. Phone tilted toward her over coffee. She looked at it for a long time. "The garden," she said. "I know. We'd have to redo the whole east side. I know. I want bougainvillea. Then we'll plant bougainvillea." She looked at him. He looked at her. The coffee went cold between them, ignored. "Okay," she said. They moved in on a Tuesday. The first night they had no furniture except a mattress on the floor and 2 mugs and a Bluetooth speaker, and they ate takeout and played music too loud for the neighborhood, and Lois laughed at something Jaewon said so hard she knocked over her cup, and he looked at her in that lamplight in that empty room and thought, "This is it. This is exactly it." She looked back at him and thought the same thing, in her own language, in the quiet part of herself she kept only for true things. She found out on a morning that was completely ordinary in every other way. A Thursday. Light coming through the new curtains. Coffee already made. Jaewon had been up first. She could hear him moving in the kitchen, could smell the coffee. She was in the bathroom, not thinking about anything in particular, when the test in her hand became a declaration. She sat on the edge of the tub for a moment, put her hand over her stomach, flat, silent, holding its secret, and smiled, slowly. The smile of a woman who had fought for her peace and built it brick by brick and earned every single beautiful thing now coming to her. She walked out to the kitchen. Jaewon was at the stove, badly attempting eggs, arguing with himself in Korean under his breath about the heat setting. He had a dish towel over his shoulder. His hair was uncombed. He was, objectively, still the most handsome man she had ever stood in a kitchen with, which was frankly an inconvenience. She set the test on the counter beside him. He looked down, looked up, looked down again. Set the spatula down with the careful movements of a man whose hands had stopped working properly. Lois, the eggs are burning, she said. He turned off the stove, turned to face her fully. His eyes were doing something she had only seen twice before, the day they married, and the day she'd walked down those Gala stairs in Emika's shoes, that specific undone, full-chest look that he usually kept very private. Are you? Yes. We're. Yes. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps and held her. Properly held her, both arms, her face in his neck, and she let him, arms around his waist, and they stood there in their kitchen in their house with the bougainvillea they hadn't planted yet outside and the whole enormous future sitting quietly around them like a room they hadn't walked into yet but could already feel the warmth of. I'm going to be insufferable about this, he said into her hair. You already are about everything else, she said. It'll fit right in. He laughed, breath warm against her head. She closed her eyes. Outside, Seoul went on being Seoul. Somewhere across the city, Hyunja Park was on her phone, probably arguing with Taemin about lighting. Zola was asleep 13 time zones away, blissfully unaware that in approximately 1 hour she would receive a voice note that would make her scream loud enough to wake her neighbors. Emika was in his studio, probably doing something extraordinary with leather. The Italian shoes were on a shelf in Lois's dressing room, next to the black ones, both exactly where they belonged. And Lois Park, Lois Aching Park, businesswoman, linguist, strategic genius, unbothered queen, and now, quietly, magnificently, stood in her kitchen being held by her husband and felt, for the very first time, in a very long time, that there was nowhere left to win. She had already won. She had won so completely that winning had become the furniture of her life. Unremarkable, present, simply there when she needed it. She opened her eyes. The eggs were definitely ruined. You're making me breakfast, she said. Obviously, he said, not letting go yet. Something that doesn't require the stove. Done. And J1? Call your mother. A pause. Then, with a warmth so genuine it surprised even him. Yeah, she'll want to know. Lois smiled against his chest. She would. And that, beloved, is how you win a war without firing a single shot. You simply refuse to lose.
Hello besties, in a world that will underestimate you for your skin, your origin, your gender, or simply because you dare to walk into a room they reserve for themselves, just to win. You don't have to shrink yourself to make insecure people comfortable. Racism will come dressed in silk and a smile. Classism will come from people who share your table. Jealousy will come from the ones closest to your blessing. And still you show up, not to prove everything, not for revenge, not for validation, but because you are always supposed to be there. Besties, stop trying to put out fires started by people who are simply afraid of their light. Master your craft, protect your peace, learn their language literally and figuratively, and when they hide your shoes, show up in better ones. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe, and share.